What's at stake in the Red River rivalry? You got Oklahoma, Texas, or Texas, Oklahoma, however you want to say it. Probably depends on who you root for. But when it comes to this game, I love so much that we get it in October. Like, we're first in line for Rivalry Saturday at the end of the season. We're all about that. I would expect us to be at a game when it comes to Rivalry Saturday of the college football season. Fires us up. But the fact that we get this one, and it's kind of a standalone rivalry of sorts, it's beautiful. I can't wait to watch it. I can't wait to talk about it. We're going to talk about it right now. We're actually going to predict this game, though, tomorrow morning. So we're recording this on October 2nd on a Monday. You're probably seeing this on a Monday. Tuesday, October 3rd, we're having our live show 11 a.m. Eastern, as we always do on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We're giving you our pick for this game at that time. All right, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. I'm going to go ahead and link the scheduled live show below this, and we'll pin that comment so you can make sure you're dialed in there. Also, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram at JD Piquel. I'll shoot you a link there as well when we go live. I have a lot of content around this game. Regardless, make sure you're locked in because there's a lot going on within this game. And like I said, there's a lot at stake in this game. The obvious part of this is a loss. You just lose control, right? Like you lose the mulligan that you would potentially have for the college football playoff race. You may lose control of your college football playoff race destiny entirely. You lose control of where you stand when it comes to the Big 12 and that whole race. Now, you probably can still make the Big 12 title even if you lose this game. I don't think we should kid ourselves and say this is like sudden death for the Big 12, but you never want to drop a conference game, much less to your rival. And I think also, like I said, control is a big thing. Like you continue to win games and go undefeated, and that's how you'd like to end up in Jerry World for both these teams, should that be the way their season goes. So what's at stake here from a broad strokes perspective is control. Now for each team, though, I think there's different things at stake. And so for Texas, I think a win, if we look at what the rest of their schedule holds, this is really the last hurdle for them when it comes to the roster that matches up with them from a talent standpoint. Like the next toughest game for them, in my mind, would be the game against Kansas State. If you're just looking at the roster, they get them in Austin. And so if you beat Oklahoma, you have beaten then Alabama and you've beaten Oklahoma. And the rest of the way, we talked about it a lot with Texas, the rest of the way for them is just taking care of business and worrying about Texas. Now, good teams worry about themselves to begin with, and that's all they worry about. But you understand what I'm saying here. When it comes to Texas, this is the roster that I think poses the best threat to you the rest of your schedule. So that's the first part. The other part of this is I think it's further proof of concept of what Steve Sarkisian has done at Texas and where they are. Like, think about the first year he got there. Missing the bowl game. Just looking like just so far below the standard they've come to expect in Austin and what they expect from a resources perspective, what they put into their football team. They were not getting it out of their football team at that point in time when it comes to Steve Sarkisian and what they had done at Texas. So if you clear all those hurdles and you get to a point where you beat Bama, you won Red River for the second year in a row, for the first time since 2008 and 2009, you go back-to-back if you're Texas, like, I think that would say a lot about just what he's done there and about where they stand now as a team and as a program at Texas. So a loss now is a little bit tricky to talk about because there would be some overreaction baked into this, and we'll talk about overreactions for both these teams a little bit later in this segment. But I think a loss for Texas, you would at least have to start turning down the volume on the more extreme portion of the college football public that is just waiting to talk about old Texas. They say, oh, this is what Texas always does. Oh, old Texas, I told you. And people are going to say this whenever Texas loses a football game, period. Doesn't matter if it's this year, doesn't matter if it's last year. Like, people are just waiting with bated breath to say things about Texas. Same thing with OU. They're waiting to say things about OU as well. But you hear what I'm saying? These big brands just have a little bit more eyeballs on them. And with more eyeballs come more opinions. And if you drop this game to Oklahoma, the feeling would be, yep, old Texas, they beat Bama, but they can't beat OU. Yep, that's just like Texas. Took their eye off the ball in the rivalry game, couldn't get it done. You'd have to deal with all that noise. Now, is that fair? Is that true? You know how we feel about that. We'll talk about this a little bit later when it comes to the overreaction. But you have to deal with the meme culture, probably some Michael Jordan crying faces, plastered over different Texas figures, find their way onto the internet. Like, it's just a bad deal. Just something you don't want to deal with. It comes with more noise that comes with losing. So that's kind of a part of it for Texas when you have to deal with a loss in terms of what's at stake. But again, proof of concept, clearing your last hurdle for the Big 12 and for the college football playoff race is how it would feel. Now, is that in actuality the case? Remains to be seen. I'm not saying Texas doesn't have football games left on their schedule they could lose, but when you look at the gauntlet for them ahead, this is the one that feels like the last roster from a talent perspective that can match up with you the best, at least. Now for Oklahoma, a win for them would be huge. A win for them would be huge for Brent Venables and just for the Brent Venables era as a whole. And it's only been 1 year. Like, college football is very much so a what have you done for me lately, especially with the transfer portal. But it would be a signature win for Brent Venables, and it would inject a ton of belief into what he's doing there. Because last year, so much made about them being 6-7 and how they lost to Texas in this game last year with basically no quarterback and having to go wildcat a lot of the game and 49-0. Like, so much noise, so many headlines. Going back to what we said about Texas and the meme culture, there's been a lot of punchline culture around Oklahoma. It is what it is. But if you beat Texas, the feeling would be, oh, that's why we hired him. Oh, that's what he came to Norman to do. Okay, got it. Because you hired him, you thought culture, you thought hard hat lunch pail, you thought someone who fits Oklahoma better, someone who gets Oklahoma, someone who's going to bring a tough brand of football back to Norman, Oklahoma that you hadn't really had there in the Lincoln Riley era. No shade on Lincoln Riley. They were just all about scoring points, and Brent Venables is a little bit more about playing tough defense, and they still want to score points. Don't get it twisted. I promise you, Jeff Lebby and Dylan Gabriel would 100% testify to that. But that's the feeling is, okay, we're starting to get some return on investment here in the second year. And so I think it also probably provides a good amount of confidence for the transition to the SEC, because there's no way around it. Like, the win over Alabama that Texas had, it means something. It means something about where Texas is at. It means something about the way that Texas is built. And for Oklahoma, if you take down Texas, transitive property doesn't really apply in college football. So I want to steer clear of that conversation, but you would have to feel a little bit like, okay, we are trending the right direction. A win over Texas, period, would feel like you're trending the right direction. But based on what Texas has done and what they've shown they're capable of, beating them in a year that's supposed to be their year would feel, I'm sure, very gratifying, and I would have to imagine would bolster a lot of conversations when it comes to Oklahoma and how they feel about the SEC and their transition to the SEC. Now, if they lose, it would provide this feeling of, we're not as far as we thought we were. And whether that's fair or not, it is what it is. I think it's how the conversation would go. But with that feeling of we're not as far along as we thought we were, would also kind of transition into this feeling of, okay, well, how far along are we? And I think some of that you have to gauge off of the eye test and how this game looks. Like, if it's 49-0, it's a very different conversation if it's 31-28. Now, to be clear, I don't think Oklahoma's losing this game 49-0. Again, I'll give you my pick as to who I think wins in this game tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern on this very show. But I think if it is a game where it is definitive and it's Texas, let's say it's Texas by 10 points to 14 points. Let's just say. Not predicting it, let's just say. If that's the case, you feel like, okay, we still have some ways to go here if you're Oklahoma to get to where we want to be. And for Oklahoma, that's frustrating because Oklahoma is a place where you don't really feel like you should have to do this long building process in Norman. You got the resources, you got the brand power, you're recruiting well for the most part under Brent Venables. Like, everything is there at Oklahoma to succeed and to succeed pretty quickly. And so I'm not saying that you question Brent Venables. In fact, I'm about to say the opposite here in a second, but you do kind of start to have this feeling of, all right, we don't really do rebuilds around here. Yes, we revamp, but if we're 2 years in a row now off the mark by a definitive margin, like what's going on here? What's going on? Why are we having to do this whole building process at a place where we shouldn't really have to do a ton of building? And I don't think that's incorrect. I do think that's incomplete, because if you lose this game, there's a couple of overreactions you're going to have for both sides of this. But for Oklahoma, the overreaction I want us to guard against is that Brent Venables isn't the right guy for the job. If they lose to Texas, and like I said, it's by a definitive margin, Brent Venables and his standing as the head coach in Norman should not be called into question. One, because it's one game, right? Like, I understand it's Texas and Oklahoma. I understand it's a huge rivalry. I understand that this is like the game if you're Oklahoma, but still, like, we got to kind of use some good judgment here and understand that he's a first-time head coach. It's not just his second year as the head coach at Oklahoma. It's his second year as a head coach, period. I think they are trending in the right direction as a whole. And so even though you don't feel like you should have to wait a long time for this big rebuild, I don't think one game qualifies as, oh, they're still in a rebuild phase. I don't think that's the case. It could feel that way. That might be the feeling that you sit with for a week. But again, one loss. Oklahoma could lose this game, win the rest of their games, very likely find themselves in Jerry World, and maybe they play Texas for a second time. I don't think you can be down on Brent Venables because you drop one football game. There's going to be people that say it, going to be people that put it out on their own show. We will not traffic in that, I promise you, but let's just kind of guard against that overreaction should Oklahoma drop this game. Now for Texas, if they drop this game, let's not dismiss everything they've done to this point. Let's not dismiss what we saw in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Let's not dismiss what this team is still capable of. Let's not dismiss what Quinn Ewers is. Let's not dismiss what they have weapon-wise on that offense. Like, there's a lot to look into here with Texas that I think is still solid that we know about them. And again, dropping one game does not define them. That old Texas, that narrative, it's going to come back. I promise you, if they drop this game, be careful buying into that. One game is not indicative of where a team stands culturally, where a team is personnel-wise. We got to look for patterns. And just because there's been a pattern before Steve Sarkisian even got there, before Quinn Ewers even got there, doesn't mean that pattern is going to apply to Texas if they do drop this football game. Now, for both teams, notice I didn't talk about an overreaction if they win. If Oklahoma wins, if Texas wins, I think in this game, every conversation is on the table. Like, then you can talk about Oklahoma being in that college football playoff race. At that point, like, hey, they're undefeated. They just took down Texas. Texas took down Bama. Like, we understand it's a good Texas football team they just beat. For Texas, same thing. Like I said, you cleared your last hurdle. All right now. Kansas State's going to be a good football team. I don't think TCU's an easy out. I don't think the rest of their schedule has just surefire wins written all over it. But if you can beat Oklahoma and you can beat Bama, like, those are probably your two toughest games on the slate. At that point now, I feel good about everything you can do. Now, will you do it? We'll see. But they can win the rest of their games, and it starts in this one against Oklahoma. So for both teams, man, I just love that we get this rivalry again in October. I love that we got two great quarterbacks. I love that we got two great coaches. In my mind, I still think Brent Venables is a very good football coach. At the very least, you cannot argue with the fact that the dude knows how to coach defense. And so if they win this game, you got to probably tip your hat a little bit to the defensive effort for Oklahoma, slowing down this Texas offense. But again, Oklahoma, Texas, Texas, Oklahoma, however you want to say it, Red River going down this weekend. We're picking this game. I'll say it for the last time. Picking this game tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. The live show is already scheduled out. I'm going to drop the link below to this comment section. I'll pin it there, and we'll have a good time, man. Cannot wait to see y'all there. Hey, we love y'all. We appreciate y'all. We're going to see y'all tomorrow morning. We're going to keep this party rolling. Like I said, we will see y'all next time. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.